So the code that you should see, hopefully, is 4YH5U. 4YH5U is the code. It should appear in the classroom, but it will also appear here in the top left-hand corner. Not this one here, 4YH5U. Oops, that keeps popping up for some reason. All right, waiting for you to sign in. Awesome. No, that maybe if I click unshare, then close. All right, here we go. Joining in, fantastic. Good to see you all in here now. And as said, if we end up with Abu arriving, Lancelot arriving, it would be fantastic to know that. Now, we've been talking about unemployment, and one of the things that we talked about was the sort of the critique or critical thinking about unemployment. The idea that we can see a number and just go, that's the number, right? But there's more to it than just that. There's the number. There is how many percent people are unemployed. We can work that out. But when we look at the actual economy in and of itself, several questions need to be asked. So, for example, what is the size of the public versus the private sector? That was one of the last things that we looked at, and we decided that there was going to be more job security in the public sector. The idea being that the government is more likely to have a job for you and to keep your job secure, right, security, in the government sector than in the private sector, right? So as you see in the world around us at the moment, there are a number of private sector businesses that have, unfortunately, said to their workers that we can't employ you anymore, whereas the government has to keep ticking on. And that's the central government, but also the local governments as well, right? So all of the things that local governments do. So sometimes working in the public sector might give you more job security than the private sector, may not have as high a wage potentially, but you may feel quite secure by being in the public sector. When we talk about this, the terminology can sometimes be a little bit vague, so we do need to be a bit careful when we describe situations in the economy to do with unemployment. So one of the first groups that we need to talk about is the labor force, all right, which isn't something that you'd see in the Star Wars movie, all right? Although you might suggest that some of those movies are a bit labored. Now, the labor force is the whole pool of people, all of the people in your economy who you could possibly be working, all right? So all of those people who have a job and all of the people who are unemployed, because they're people who could potentially have a job. So they're all in what you call your labor force. And the size of your labor force is a statistic you can work out. The percentage of your labor force that's unemployed is another percentage that can be worked out, right? And you can also make some discussions there about who's in the labor force and who isn't. When we're wanting to work out what the actual number is, a little bit of maths involved, all right? So we're wanting to work out a rate of change for unemployment. So what we do is we use that labor force figure that we saw just before, and we work out how many people are unemployed as a percentage of that labor force. So we have a look here. So there's the unemployed, right? That number there. There's the labor force. Work it out, the difference over the original times 100 over 1. So in this case, you're looking at 0.7 million expressed as a percentage of 13.3 million people times 100 should, if the maths works, give you a number of 5.3%. So that's a rate of unemployment. So in the economy, 5.3%. That's what percentage of your labor force you would suggest is unemployed. All right? And it's all about how big that slice of the pie is. Okay, so you get a pizza, all right, and you've cut it up. How big a slice will that be in proportion to the whole pizza? All right, now it is very useful to have one number, right, to represent unemployment. But how did we calculate the unemployment rate again? All right, you just saw a couple of seconds ago. How did we work it out? Have a go. Oh, good work, Emma. Well done. Fantastic. See all you math magicians, look at that. All right, waiting on a few more. Have a go. Just going to quickly check to see if Abu has arrived. Yes. Fantastic. What about Lancelot? No Lancelot, but Abu has definitely arrived. All right, so I can change your designation, Abu, to being present. All right, so have a go, team. How do you calculate the unemployment rate? Just waiting on a couple more to answer. And we'll see how we get on from there. Brandon, do you have a favorite number? Sorry, favorite number. Unemployment rate, how did you calculate it? All right, another 30 seconds. Right. Okay. All right, good work, team. So that is calculating an unemployment rate. Now I'm just going to jump out of the share and back to the meet. All right, and then back to here. No problems, Abu. Just want to know one thing. Why do you think it's important or significant that we have one number, an unemployment rate? Why is it important that we have that one number? What does that enable us to do? Have a think, put an answer into the chat. Why, if we've got one number for unemployment, why might that be a good thing? What are we able to do with that one number? How much needs to be done to reduce unemployment? Yes, well done. It's a good answer, Sean. What else do we think? Anything else? You might want to start with who's interested in knowing what number we have with regards to unemployment. Who would be interested to know? Government, yes, indeed. The government are very interested to know about the percentage of unemployment. Why do you think they're interested to know the percentage of unemployment? Yes, you could link back to what Sean said about how much needs to be done, but why else do you think? No problem, Lancelot, no problem. Good to see you. Please make sure you join the Nearpod, and I will just change your designation to present. All right, so we're asking why you think it's important, or why might the government be interested in knowing the actual number of people unemployed? What's the rate, the unemployment rate? Why might that be a good thing for them? What can they do with that number? To further expand on the question, how do we get governments in the first place? Elections, absolutely. And if you're a politician, you're wanting to be elected, there's an unemployment number. How might that help you? Yes, absolutely right, campaign. All right, because we've said that these are government objectives. These are goals for the government, right? And having a low unemployment rate is a goal for the government. So 2 reasons that the government might be quite interested in that with regards to elections. The first is for campaigning, to say, hey, look at what we're doing, fantastic, ooh, yay. And the second might be, we have wanting to get into power, we see the level of unemployment, we say it's not acceptable, we are going to change that. So using that number, you will find politicians are quite keen on knowing what that actual number is. But what we're going to find is maybe it's not quite as simple as it appears, all right? So just one number sounds like a good idea, all right? But we also can consider something called a participation rate, because again, it's not quite as simple as saying these are the people who are unemployed, right? This is the percentage from the labour force who are unemployed, because we've got more people than are just in the labour force. We've got an entire working age population, right? Now, not everybody is in the labour force. So therefore, we need to work out how many people are participating in the labour force, okay? Because there are going to be people who voluntarily aren't working, and voluntarily, therefore, maybe they're staying at home, looking after a family, maybe they've just given up on trying to find a job, and so therefore they're not actually in the labour force at all. They're just not counted. Could be that they are the right age to be working, but they're in, university or school or something, which again means that they're not actively looking for work, so they're not in the labour force, right? So we then need to consider what's called a participation rate. So of the working age population, so it might be, you might look at it from 16 on up, or you might look at it from 15 on up. It depends very much on the country and what they decide. And see, of that group of people, what percentage of them are actually in the labour force? So if we take this example here, we've got 20 million people, we're saying, in the working age population. Okay, and of those, we're going to say that 13.3 million of them are actually in the labour force, which works out to be, a little bit more than 2/3. All right, 2/3 of the working population are actually trying either have a job or trying to get a job. Okay, and that has some quite big implications. What are the rest of the third doing? Now, maybe it's okay. The rest of the third are in training or, institutions or whatever, right? But maybe it's not okay. Maybe they're the discouraged people who just can't find a job and they're not able to, and we need to find those people perhaps. So knowing the unemployment rate doesn't tell us the participation rate, okay? And even knowing the participation rate, it doesn't tell us the participation rate of the individual groups within society. And you might be interested in that. You might want to know the participation rate of the women in society. You might want to know the participation rate of young people within this group. You might want to know the participation rate of different ethnic groups within your economy and how that all fits. And then you're able to work out policies that specifically target certain groups of people. Okay, so we take it one step further. We can ask you the question, what does a participation rate actually tell us? There you go, have a go. What is the participation rate all about again? Okay, here we go. What is participation rate all about? Yeah, that's good, Sean. Yeah, so it's working age population, because obviously the population also includes people who aren't in the working age, so people who are under the age of, say, 15 or so. So it will have to be the working age, because you wouldn't expect children to be working, you know, that would be a bit sad. Good work, Aman. Absolutely right. Percentage of people who are in the labour force. Yeah, good. All right, we could expand on that, Irina, and talk about the percentage of people in the working age population who are in the labour force, but absolutely right. Excellent, Emma, that's exactly right. Waiting on a couple more to have a go. Come on, Kane, come on, Brandon, have a go. Abu, have a go. Good man. Yeah, you've got it a bit backwards. The participation rate is the proportion of the working age population that is either employed or unemployed. All right, so the people who are in the labour force is what we're after. The participation rate is the proportion of the working age population that is in the labour market, labour force. All right. But good effort, Abu. Yes, good work, Kane. So it's how many people are in the labour force from the working age population. All right. And it might surprise you. Different countries, obviously, they're going to have different numbers with this. Good. All right. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what the unemployment rate is in Malaysia. And we're going to choose two other countries, and we're going to compare Malaysia to those two other countries. So away you go. You can ask Dr. Google, what is the unemployment rate in Malaysia, and find two other countries and compare. Away you go. What is the unemployment rate in Malaysia? And then what are the unemployment rates in two other countries so that you can do a comparison, an inter-country comparison. You can choose which other countries, up to you. Because we're living here in Malaysia at the moment, it's good to use Malaysia as a base. unemployment rate in Malaysia and 2 other countries to compare. Okay, oh, look at that. Emma's found some. Malaysia 4.8, France 8.43, Brazil 11.9. Wow. Other countries can we find? Malaysia 4.8 says Czech Republic 1.9 and Argentina 10.44. Malaysia 4.8, Gambia 9%, Qatar 0.09. That's interesting. 4.8%. Unemployment rate in China 3.6, Canada 8.1. Malaysia 4.8, Hong Kong 6.8, Norway 3.3. All right, have a go, Brandon. Have a go, Lancelot. Fiji 4.8. Cambodia 0.7. I think you might be looking there. If it's 0.7, it might be a quarter. That might be a quarterly figure. Vietnam's unemployment rate 2%. Goodness me, that's not a lot, is it? Philippines 2.15. Yes, good point, Hung. All right, depends where you do where the actual data is published or when the data is published. All right, wait on a couple more to have a go. Here we go. India, unemployment rate 5.4, UK 4.5. Okay. Here we go. What do we got here, Brandon? 4.8, 3.9 for Korea and 4.2 for China. Now, you'll find that different sources will probably either quote exactly the same statistic or they might quote a slightly different statistic. That's okay. All right. You might also find some sources of the information about the unemployment rate might be talking about unemployment rate per quarter as opposed to unemployment rate per year. So usually if it's less than 1%, then it's usually a per quarter as opposed to a per year, an annual rate. All right, so numbers that are sort of 4.8%, we would assume that they are calculated on a per yearly basis. All right, now if we have a look, I mean, Hong Kong 6.8, that's quite a bit now. Hong Kong's, you know, obviously part of China, but somebody had the China one there, 4.2. Now, 4.2 doesn't sound like a lot because it sounds like Malaysia's got more unemployment. Right? But remember, it's a percentage. Okay, it's a percentage of the labour force. So 4.2% for China, or, you know, I think the other one someone said was 3.7. Okay, when you've got hundreds of millions of people in your labour force, 4% is a lot of people. All right. Whereas in Malaysia, the Malaysian labour force is probably close to 20 million people. Right? I think when I looked at the statistics the other day, there was 22 million people over the age of 18. So you're probably looking at upwards of 25 million people potentially in the labour force. But that's, you've obviously got to take institutional people out, etc., from that. So maybe a bit less than that. So 4% of 20 million people, not quite as much as, say, 4% of a couple of 100 million people. Right? So the actual numbers themselves are going to be quite different. South Korea, 3.9%. I don't know the population of South Korea, and a comparison of the population of South Korea with the population of Malaysia. I'm going to say there's more people in Malaysia than South Korea. Am I right on that, Kane? Are there more people in Malaysia than South Korea? I think that because South Korea is smaller and there's obviously islands and the like around Malaysia. So my assumption is, and Kane, feel free to tell me I'm wrong, that there are less people in South Korea than there are in Malaysia. I could be wrong. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong.
There's more people in South Korea.
More people in South Korea? Okay. So therefore, you might make a suggestion then, if there's more people, physical people in South Korea, that's a bigger worry, right? That 3.9% than Malaysia's 4.9, because there's more people. So that might represent potentially a bigger number of people. So even though you've got a number, remember, this is a lot of what we're doing today, is we're saying, here's the numbers, but, right, we're looking at the however, right? What do we else need to consider? Can we do an effective, an effective comparison here? Look, Malaysia and Fiji. Well, Fiji's got like 10 people living in it. Well, not quite, but so 4% of 10 people, is a lot less. It's not saying that it's less serious potentially, but definitely a whole lot more people unemployed potentially in Malaysia than in Fiji. Okay, so even when you see the numbers, we need to be careful when we're analysing them, because the population sizes are going to be vastly different. We also need to be careful, because looking at one number is kind of like an average. It doesn't actually show you what's really going on within the economy. For example, it won't tell you anything about the different ages involved. So you can look at unemployment rates based on age. You can split the data up, because you might be interested in that. You might want to know how many people who are young are unemployed, how many people who are older are unemployed. Yeah, you might be interested in the gender balance, okay, and thinking about what percentage, what weighting of the unemployment rate is based on the different genders. Right? You might equally be interested in different ethnic groups. Again, the same basic idea. Are there ethnic groups that are more heavily represented in unemployment statistics? Okay, and if there are, maybe all of these policies that we create about unemployment, we might actually need to target the policies to specific ages or genders or different ethnic groups. Maybe that's a more realistic approach to a policy than just having one overall broad brush sort of approach to a policy that may not actually get to the root of the problem. Right? And you can also then look at the labour force participation rates, as we said, looking at different ages, different genders, and different ethnic groups. So because we're going to see in real life differences in the unemployment rates based on age, gender, or ethnic groups, it's possible to ask the question, why? So, being careful with your answers. Why do you think unemployment rates might vary? That means they might be different depending on ages, depending on different genders, or possibly different ethnic groups. Why are some ages, why is there higher unemployment for some age groups than others? Why is there higher unemployment for some gender, different one gender than the other? Why is there higher unemployment potentially for one ethnic group over another? And again, please be careful with your answers, with what you say in the answers. All right, so have a go. See what we can come out with. So why do you think there's an imbalance potentially between different ages or different genders or even different ethnic groups in the unemployment rates that we might see? What possible reasons could there be? Here we go, see what you think. Very interesting question. Oh, well done, Irina. That's a very good answer. Youth unemployment may be caused by insufficient skills of young workers. Young workers more affected more strongly than older workers by changes in demand. Very good. Yes. Sean, what have you put? Let's see. Unemployment rates might vary because one reason, some countries have lost a lot of men. Okay. World War II was a while back. Happens to be more women than men, not to mention USSR countries. Okay, yeah. It's a good point. Gender bias, therefore, leads to different unemployment rates between genders, quite possibly. Different ethnic groups and minorities do not have as much privilege as others, therefore having a higher unemployment rate. Well done, Harsha. Very good analysis. What do the rest of you think? Less privileged, therefore unable to access same quality good work. Aman. Yes, indeed. Very good analysis coming out today. Well done. You're waiting on a couple of others. Again, the reason for discussing this is for you then to be able to have an understanding about why having one number, is useful, but it doesn't tell you the full picture. And therefore, some of the government policies that might get put in place might not actually solve unemployment, even though technically it is a policy designed to solve unemployment. Cultural differences that affect the unemployment rates. Okay, some cultures, women believed to be a housewife, look after children. This could create a gap when looking at the gender unemployment. Certain ethnic groups would be the way the young think versus the elders. Okay, good analysis, Abu. Yes. There's no gender bias. Okay, waiting on a couple more. Couple more. Have a go. Age of salary they get, the younger usually earn less, but earning more. Okay. Some countries don't allow women to work. Yeah. Okay, good effort. Well done. Still waiting on a couple more to have a go. Companies tend to employ younger people. Yeah, okay. There will be a degree to that. I'm gonna stop the sharing, jump back into the meet, and think about this as a particular question. Absolutely, there's a lot of really good analysis that goes on there with that. Well done, team. All right, so thinking about different ages, you're absolutely right. It has to do with the skill level, potentially, the income that they're able to earn, so they may choose not to participate. All right, but if you see skill and productivity and experience, then you're more likely to hire a person who has the skills, who has the experience, who has the productivity than someone who doesn't. So yes, younger people do tend to be more represented in unemployment statistics, and sometimes it can be quite a margin. Right? There are some parts of Europe where the unemployment rate for young people, at one point at any rate, who knows now, I haven't looked now, but at one point the unemployment rate was around 20% for young people, which means 1 in every 5, which is quite scary, right, when you think about it in that sort of a context. Yeah. The genders. Now, obviously, it's a bit of an accident at birth as to what gender you come out as. So, dependent on the philosophy of the country, depending on the cultural upbringing and understandings and all of those other sorts of things that you've mentioned in your analysis, yes, there very much can be a change in, or a greater proportion perhaps of women, tends to be in many parts of the world at any rate, who are maybe more likely to be unemployed. All right, so way more heavily in that. So again, if you then add those two ideas together, you could be a young woman, and therefore you're even more penalised or even more proportionally represented in the unemployment rate. Yeah? And then the different ethnic groups. Now, yeah, there's a couple of comments made about different ethnic groups having access to, and that's one of the crucial things with regards to your analysis is, do you have the access to the education, the training, the jobs even? It could be that because of where your particular ethnic group is based, it may be that there aren't the jobs there, right? There just aren't. Yeah. So say, for example, if I use a New Zealand example, people who are what's called Pacifica, which means they grew up in the Pacific, on the Pacific Islands themselves, other than tourism, might be fishing as the major industry, yeah, but that's basically it. Okay, so they might choose to move to a whole other country in order to actually get work, right? Because where they are, there is no work other than fishing and tourism. Yeah, so can be overly populated in the unemployment statistics, and if you don't have access to education, because of varying perhaps levels of inequality, then you're not going to get the skills needed as well. So you could be potentially, if you add them all together, you could be young, you could be female, and you could be of an ethnic group that is overly represented, again, in those unemployment statistics. So just looking at that one number isn't really enough for governments to really nail the problem of unemployment. You need to look quite carefully at the data and design policies that are going to improve access to, reduce income inequality, all of those sorts of things, because you think generationally. Okay, if you are one of those people who is in the unemployment statistic, right, then you're also not getting the job and earning the higher income, which means you're unable for your children to provide them with access to the education, enabling them to get the skills that they might need as well. So it can become what's called intergenerational unemployment, and then it becomes a real problem. And again, looking at it from a New Zealand point of view, but also from a UK point of view, there was a lot of intergenerational unemployment. You had grandparents all the way through to grandchildren, none of whom had ever held a job, ever, all unemployed. And it might be because of the different ethnic group, it might be because of the lack of access to, it might be because of all sorts of other reasons, right? But that becomes a significant problem for a government, and something that they do need to consider, that it is not just as simple as, okay, we're going to increase spending, increase demand, increase employment. It might be that we need to target education systems. We might need to target attitudes towards education. It could be all sorts of things, And one that I don't know, I'm trying to remember now, was it covered? Yes, there was comment about bias. You could talk about gender bias, absolutely. People might be more likely to hire males than females, possibly. But there's also that idea, it's a word beginning with D. Anyone can come up with a relatively long word beginning with D in the chat function that might play into why some of these ages or genders or it's kind of a word like bias. But it's
discrimination.
Discrimination, thank you, Abu. Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that unfortunately we do see, right, in the labour markets. And there is a certain amount of discrimination that will be natural, right? So an employer who discriminates will be looking at, say, the different skill levels, different experiences, and discriminating based on that. The problem where discrimination comes in is if there's no valid reason for the discrimination, yeah? So say, for example, you were to say, oh, we're not going to employ any women, yeah? There isn't a valid reason necessarily for doing that. Yeah? So that would be a case where discrimination is a real problem. Yeah? And just to give you a wee example, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, a colleague of mine went for a job interview at a high school in another school, okay, from the one that we were in. Right? And this was a long time ago. We are talking a good decade and a half ago, all right? And possibly more. And at that other school, which was considered quite an elite school, as they did their interview, they'd finished the interview, they were getting a tour around the school, they were pretty much geared up to actually get to the job. And the person interviewing them said, you'll notice that there are no women here in our maths department. It was a maths teacher's job. And the person didn't notice at all. And then the interviewer added this particular phrase, which was, well, the reason why is because women can't teach maths. Yeah? So yes, bias, discrimination can actually play a part. And if you're able in hiring or not hiring of individuals, and if you are able to see those sorts of things, then yes, there is cases for you to perhaps take them to court and various other things, depending on the laws of the country, etc., that there are. But it could be something as simple as, if it's a gender bias thing, do you put on your CV, the application for your job, do you put a photo of yourself? Yeah, how do you choose to identify who you are? And obviously these days it's a whole lot more complicated. There are people in America, and I don't understand this, but there are people in America who are calling themselves binary or non-binary or something like that. I don't even know what that means, right? But putting that into a CV or a job application, what does that all mean? Yeah. What do you tell the employer about yourself? Okay, I've got a fairly innocuous name, right? David Smith. It's fairly common. It's quite a name people will understand. But what if your name people didn't understand? What if people had difficulties pronouncing your name? Would you put your full name as an applicant for a job, or would you worry that if you put that name in, people might not understand and might choose to not even interview you, So these are all questions that people actually have. And there can be significant implications, The job you apply for, because you put your name in, somebody chose not to interview you. You didn't get that job. Well, maybe it's not meant to be, but still, that is an implication. So yes, there are other factors involved with unemployment and unemployment statistics, and governments might need to be or should be aware of those, because they will have significant implications potentially further down the track. All right, now we jump back into the pod. All right. Now, last thing I want us to look at today is this wee diagram here. Now, this is looking at labour force participation. So we talked about the participation rate, right? So of the labour force, what the percentage or participation of women, the percentage of women participating in the labour force in the USA, and they've used the time period 1955 through to 2005. Now, the 1950s would be an interesting time to compare because it's right after World War II. There are still a lot of cultural beliefs and things about women and where they should be working and shouldn't be working at that sort of time. So the 2000s, obviously much closer to now. Yeah, it's 2005, so we've got a few years to go yet. But if we have a look, what they've done is they've even said, okay, it's not enough just to consider the gender of women. We need to split that particular statistic up. So they've got women here, but they've got women who are single and have never been married. It's this line. Then they've got all women, which is this black colored line here. Then the next one, they've got other women, which is women who've been divorced, widowed, or I can't read that next bit. I was going to say surprised, but I don't think that's the right word. That's this blue line here. And then this red line here is married women with a spouse present. So if you were to take this statistic, there's one really glaring difference, right, in the overall picture of women participating in the labour force. And it's this idea that if you're single and haven't been married as a woman, you are a whole lot more likely to be participating in the labour force than if you are married. Okay? And in fact, those statistics have narrowed over time, okay, where there are much more women now in the sort of more modern era participating in the labour force if they are married. But then there's this one, which is about people who've been, excuse me, a bit froggy in the throat, all right, a bit divorced or widowed, separated, that was the other word. So divorced, widowed, or separated, that group of people there has actually remained fairly consistent all those years through. So it's about 40 to 50%, so only around a 10% change, which isn't a lot, all the way from 1955 to 2005. So that's, you know, a good range of 50 years. There hasn't been a huge increase in the number of that group of people participating in the labour force. So some interesting statistics. So even if you're able to see one statistic, it is possible to break it down even further and look at what's hidden behind the data. So the whole session today, a lot of what we're discussing, yes, it's statistics and how to calculate them, but it's also how to analyze them critically and how to say, yes, that's the number, but because we're basing economic policy on these numbers. We've got an unemployment rate of 4.8% in Malaysia. What do we do? Yeah. Wow. Yeah. What about we look at the different ethnic groups or the different genders? Or what about even regionally? Is there a difference in unemployment rates in different regions of Malaysia? In which case, maybe our policies need to be targeted at those different areas. Okay, that's what I want us to take away from today, right? Knowing the calculations, the terminology, so labour force participation rates, but also understanding that the data in and of itself, so what is it used for, but the data in and of itself doesn't tell you the complete picture, and that we might need to have a further, more in-depth look at the data when we are deciding the specifics of government policies that we might use to help improve the problem, the evil in our economy of unemployment. All right, team. Now, here's what I'd like you to do, please. All right, you are going to have access to the recording of the lesson. You'll be able to add some extra depth to your notes from it. You need to review the terminology in particular, look at those calculations, make sure you are familiar with those, because remember in the exam, they're not going to give you the formula. You're just going to be expected to know it. All right. So if you are asked, it's more likely to be asked those particular calculation questions in a multiple choice. All right, but you know it could happen also in your paper too, the short responses as well. And what we're seeing now in macroeconomics is how everything's going to link to everything else. So when there's economic growth in an economy, it's going to have an effect on inflation, but it's also going to have an effect on unemployment. So the more we discover, the more we see the linking between the different topics that we've covered. All right, so we talked about unions a while back. Well, then we discovered that unions have an effect on unemployment. Yeah, we talked about the market model, and now we worked out that the market model is where wages get set. So another market, right? So another application of the market model. Right, so important to review the concepts, to review the calculations, make sure you're understanding of them, ask any and all questions that you need, add extra depth to your notes from the recording of the lesson, Work your way through any set work that has been posted of late. There is more work practice questions that's going to arrive soon. If it doesn't arrive today, it'll arrive over the next couple of days for you to work your way through. Otherwise, as would say in the land of my birth, e kōrero, which means